Hey, what is going on? Eric Bach, your host of the Look Great Naked podcast. And today I sit down with my friend, fantastic coach, and my personal coach, Blake West, who you can find over on Instagram at BlakeWest22. Blake works for Maximum Health and Performance, and today we break down the 6 keys to maximizing health and performance. On this podcast, we talk about the specific detriments of long-term dieting and why stress management is such an important component to be able to look great naked without living in the gym. Going a little bit further, we dig into some of the important components in terms of gut health, blood work, and some of the key training concepts and nutrition protocols that you need to follow, not only to look your best, but to also optimize your health and overall development. Blake is an incredible source of wisdom, so I highly recommend that you follow him over on social media. Now, if you're getting value directly from this podcast or any of the other podcasts on the Look Great Naked podcast platform, please share your favorite episode, tag me at Bach Performance over on Instagram, and I will send over one of my favorite supplements from Legion Athletics directly to one winner. That's it. Let's jump into today's show. I like to do a little bit, still like 1 or 2 days. Just 'cause I got so many things I'm doing on the marketing side. I know for me, like our check-ins, I keep wanting to bump them earlier and earlier and earlier because there's always people that are dragging behind.
Yeah, always.
With the amount that we have. And so like first it was Fridays and it was like, okay, now like we bumped it back to Thursdays and we have a policy now. I'm like, if you don't have it done by, let's say Saturday at 10 a.m., like I'm not going to respond to anything until Monday. And it might be Monday afternoon.
Yeah.
But even then, I'm going to, just because my role is changing so much as the business grows, I'm going to be like, if I don't have it by end of business Friday, like, I'm sorry, because I got to have the headspace.
The more I get into this stuff, you got to create those boundaries. If not, you're going to lose your mind. You got to create your own, or you got to protect your own mental energy. Otherwise, you'll lose it very fast.
You know, the thing I learned is if you don't protect your time, nobody else will.
No.
And especially with something like coaching, I think anything where it's very much service-based and you have people who are opening up to you and, you know, trying to optimize health, performance, cognitive, whatever it is, that there's such a huge allostatic stress load that really comes in that you don't even realize that you're stressed. But sometimes the stuff you hear as a coach, I mean, you got people pouring their heart out to you. You know, I've had people tell me stuff that they can't tell anybody else, that they should be telling, you know, the police, whatever it is. While I'm honored to be able to be there for people with some of that stuff, I know that I realize a lot of coaches do not come prepared with it. And a lot of coaches are inherently type A. And so they just kind of white knuckle through that same stress until they get to a point where it's like, wow, this stuff is really weighing on me. And a lot of coaches actually, I think, end up leaving the industry because they just get so burnt out and their own stress management isn't optimized given everything that they have going on.
100%. I notice that as I go too. It's like every single person that you work with has their own energy that they give off. And one of the coaches' jobs is to create those boundaries and protect that. Because I've noticed over time, let's say we let one client's energy kind of rub off on us. Doesn't really seem like too big of a deal, but when you have, you know, a big roster of clients and you're talking to several different individuals in one day, that one person's energy rubbing off on you, you may transition that to the next check-in and the next client that you talk to. So that's why, man, I'm really careful now with the circle and the roster that I have. That energy just doesn't affect the coach and that one person. It's like it affects the entire circle one way or another, indirectly.
It does. And, you know, that's one thing that I talk consistently with a lot of my clients on. And this can be difficult, but are the people around you, are they supportive of the things that you want to do? Or is there a lot of negative energy, especially this time of year when we're talking about holidays? People are seeing a lot of people that maybe they don't. You know, you've got maybe that awkward uncle where there's always a difficult conversation at the table that half the people don't agree with and shit hits the fan. But, you know, crafting that social circle is so crucial. Just not only just having like the support of people who are going to be supportive and aligned with the things that you are looking to do, you know, for your health, for your body, for whatever it is, but protecting your own energy, because we are the quality of the 5 people that we spend our most time with. And when that quality really tends to go down, whether it's from a work environment, a family environment, and we can't show up as the best version of ourselves, ultimately, that's one of the most unhealthy things that we can do, especially when we feel that incongruency and that misalignment with our actions and the things that we are putting forward.
100%. Man, I was going down a rabbit hole with this with someone the other day, and the deeper that I started to think into it, the deeper I kept going. And I think a lot of it, even with, you know, several of the clients that I have, a lot of that stuff comes from past traumas and, you know, kind of creates this subconscious way that they just, you know, respond to things now. And a lot of like stress resiliency and, you know, managing all that. We know how important that is for physique enhancement or, health, is protecting yourself from your own subconscious that's just wired that way. Because, like one thing goes wrong. Let's say, you wake up and something happens. We can't control that, but we can control how we respond to that. So if that subconscious is wired to think this is a negative thing, then you start attracting more of that the rest of your day. So a lot of that we can always talk about, do like meditation, yoga, manage stress, but how can we actually start rewiring the way that our subconscious works, the way that we just respond to those situations? I think there's a lot to be said, and that's a lot of inner and deep work that's not necessarily, within my scope by any means. Other professionals are a little bit better at that, but I think there's a lot to be said there in regards to actually being able to manage that stress. It's just being able to respond a little bit differently and rewire that subconscious.
Yeah, I see that quite a bit where I have something coming up with a check-in message that I'm sending this week, but it's this idea that I'll get a message from somebody. They're like, I fucked up on my diet. And then they beat themselves up over it. And then it's a whole week, And what I always try to tell people is like, you didn't fuck up. Like, you're a human being. Like, I don't know anybody who's been 100% perfect with a diet, like prepping for a shoot, prepping for anything. Like, there's always a slip up to some extent. And even people who are the most dedicated in the world to it, who literally might be making money from the physique that they have, And so if you are somebody who's working 40 plus hours a week, you've got a family and all these different things, you slipping up and having dessert when it wasn't on plan, listen, you're human, you're not a robot. But where people really get into issues with stuff like that, it's not that they went off plan. It's like the mental construct that they have directly around it, that it's like this huge mistake. And it's an indication of who they are as a person. Yes. And like the quality of the person that they are. And I find so many people get stuck in this, and then it becomes that slippery slope. It's messed up again, messed up again. And then they start to identify as, I'm a person who can't stick to a healthy protocol, because they attach their identity directly to that one particular action, no matter how big or small it is. And that's where people get stuck, I think, in a lot of vicious kind of diet cycles.
Yeah, I saw something funny on social media the other day. It was related to that. It was like, people mess up one time and then they're just like, oh, kind of F it. Like, I'll pick up next week or next Monday. It's like, well, if you doze off at night and forget to brush your teeth one night, are you just going to wait till the new year to start brushing your teeth? It's one of those things to where like it happened and we just, we just got to move on. And that's the thing about over the holidays, kind of a good season to relate that to. It's like Christmas is just one day. Thanksgiving's just one day. New Year's Eve is just one day. That's 3 days out of the year. And you see a lot of people around this time of year to where the whole Thanksgiving through New Year's Day is just chaos. And they just kind of, it's just a toss up and they're just kind of like, F it. When in reality, it's like, those are just one day at a time. That's never going to derail you.
Yeah, I think it's such an important concept. And I always relate it back to being an athlete growing up. And you were an athlete growing up as well, right? You played some sports?
Yeah, correct. I played baseball growing up. Yep.
Yeah. And so you make a bad play. It happens, maybe an error, whatever the case. And you can't let that one error dictate the way you play the rest of the game. Otherwise, you're screwed, right? Like, I was a defensive back. And so when you're a defensive back, you're on an island. If you mess up, everybody sees it. It's a big play.
Yep.
And especially as a short white dude, I'm like, man, I've got to have a little bit more energy out here. And like, overall, one of the most important concepts I learned directly from sports is like, you can't let one bad play dictate the way you have the rest of the game.
Yep.
Like, you have to wipe the slate clean. You just got to get back into it, because it's going to happen. It's just, the best players at every sport miss free throws. They miss a pass, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's inevitable. I think baseball too, man, it's one of the most frustrating, because you look at, you get on base 3 out of 10 times. That's a really good batting average. So you're failing so much more than you're succeeding. So you really have to have that short-term memory with stuff. That taught me a lot. You said you were a defensive back. I was a shortstop too. So we're supposed to be the best athletes on the team. So if you mess up, everyone's kind of all eyes on you. But I think that's a really good thing to look at comparing it to sports. It's like, you fail more times usually in a sport like baseball than you succeed. If you have this long-term memory and you let that beat you up, man, you're in for a roller coaster. You're in for a long, long road.
No doubt. Have you read the book, The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel?
No.
All right. So without going into like the entire book, it's very interesting that it breaks down like the way that money, or that people think about money, belief patterns, building wealth, losing wealth. And this concept, one that he talks about, is people are wrong most of the time when it comes to betting on stocks, investments, investment banking, whatever it is. And in fact, if you look at somebody like, Warren Buffett or the late Charlie Munger, the vast majority of their profiles are decidedly average. the fact is they've just been at it for a really long time, and they've had like 4 or 5 big winners that just went up 100x, right? And that makes up 1% of the total transactions that they made in their portfolio. Yet it makes up what, $83 billion worth of wealth, right? And so like that interesting concept in finance, I think is so interesting. I see it in business as well, when a lot of people are scared to try something new and without the foresight that like ultimately most businesses do fail. They go out of business, even like Fortune 500 companies. And most products launched by most big companies go completely belly up. Amazon Fire Phone lost billions of dollars for Amazon. And Jeff Bezos' reaction, what was it? It was awesome. We're going to have an even bigger failure next time. And it's because they have something else like Amazon Web Services or Amazon Prime that just makes so much money that they can obviously like fail at these different things. But I think the overall idea is like failure is going to come one way or the other. And it's not attaching your mindset to like missing a meal, missing a workout, whatever that didn't go perfect. It's understanding that that's part of the game. The only way to win the game, so to speak, is to keep playing the game.
Yeah. And
that's ultimately what it comes down to.
You're going to keep failing too. Failure is just it's just part of the freaking process. And I always tell people too, you never really fail unless you just completely quit. You might have screwed up and learned your lesson, but is it really failure if you continue to go and, a year down the road, 6 months down the road, you're picking back up where you left off? But man, especially in this industry, I'm sure you know too, you're going to have up and down months. I mean, you may have 3 really bad months to where you just want to kind of throw in the towel with things, but then you'll have that 1 month to where you make up for all of that. And, it's a roller coaster and it's not for everybody.
That's really the case. It really is. It's building that resilience and that overall mindset. One thing I want to dig into, I guess a category of topics I want to dig into a little bit more. I think we hit on kind of some of the stress and mindset components already, but really how to maximize health and performance. Because in the fitness industry, obviously we see there are like so many segments where it's like some people are all performance, some people are all, health, some people are all purely building muscle, losing body fat. And I think what happens is people put blinders on and don't understand the correlations between all of these different things. And I think one of the biggest issues that we see is people sacrificing, maybe unknowingly sacrificing maybe what some of their physique goals or what some of their performance goals are for their health, which ultimately prevents them from reaching those goals because there's such a long time frame when it comes to being able to optimally build your body, build whatever physical quality that you're looking for. And so I would like to talk like what are some of the foundational things that you look for? Because you take a very health first approach when it comes to working with your clients and when it comes to helping people get into incredible shape.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point because I think in the industry too, there's a lot of people who kind of niche down, and not that that's necessarily a bad thing by any means, but you'll see a lot of people who are just physique coaches or who are just labeling themselves as health coaches or functional health coaches. However, they mesh. And if you don't have one, you can't really have the other. And that's where, maybe you can get someone in really good shape, but what does the after photo look like? Did you sacrifice their health to get there? Because if you did, it's going to be very, very noticeable. Maybe not 3 months down the road, maybe not even 6 months down the road. But I promise you at some point, if you did it wrong and you didn't have the support in when maybe you needed it, there's going to be backlash. And then too, it's like, if you have the ability, you get someone in really good shape, you should know how to bring them back to a good health position. Because like dieting for an extreme amount of time for like a photo shoot or contest prep, whatever it is, it's not healthy at the end of the day. Some people will make that sacrifice and that's okay as long as whoever's coaching them knows how to bring them back to homeostasis after the fact. But just some, as far as like, just some prerequisites, things that we track on a daily basis, things like your waking heart rate. Some people never even look at that. Your blood pressure, what's your sleep look like? What's your digestion look like? What's your blood glucose look like? How are we actually partitioning these nutrients that we're eating? What's going on outside of what we have in place from a stress perspective? How's your home life? What's your work schedule look like? All of that is in that circle of health. Health is so much more than just what I eat, how much I work out throughout the week. Health is what you do from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed. And I think everyone gets lost in the fact that, well, it's just what I eat. Well, I've seen a lot of people eat very healthy and be a shit show from a health perspective because of all of these outside variables that are playing a role. So I think a lot of times that gets kind of lost.
Yeah. Definitely agree with that. It's, again, we talked a little bit about some like the emotional components of it. And what I see, and even my personal experience, somebody's 34 now, is like, I would white knuckle so many things and just straight blast through whatever stress that there is. I'm very type A, business owner, own multiple businesses. Like, I'm just like, line stuff in front of me, give me, 600 milligrams of caffeine and just watch me go. But eventually you learn that stuff like that doesn't always suit your health, and the same operating systems have long-term biological costs. Like, a concept I like is like, what is a biological cost of your training or your diet or any one of these components? And a lot of people will do really well for a certain number of years with their health, with their physique, with their performance. And then all of a sudden just kind of hit a breaking point, whether they're not physiologically optimized, as resilient as they were previously, just due to getting a little bit older and some of these compounding stress variables. And all of a sudden, what was working before isn't, and they feel lost. And one of the biggest things that I see, and I would like you to elaborate on this, is like, what are some of the dangers that you see of prolonged dieting? I'm sure you see a lot of people come in where they've maybe successfully or unsuccessfully, followed some fairly aggressive diets, and all of a sudden their body's not responding to anything. And maybe they're eating what should be a calorie deficit, but the scale's not dropping and they don't know what to do.
Yeah. So dieting, and we kind of go back to the stress component. Dieting's a stressor. I mean, being in a caloric deficit's a stressor on your body. So anytime that I have someone that I know is going to go into an environment of extreme dieting, because you do that whenever athletes do that. You're again, kind of going back to the example of you're prepping for a photo shoot, you're prepping for a contest. You are going to go through some extremes. I will never take someone into that environment if we aren't checking the body. That's kind of my prerequisite to that. Kind of the same questions we just talked about. How's your home life? How's finances? How's work? What's your schedule like? How's sleep? If we don't have all those checked off, we're not going into that environment. Check those off first. Okay, then we go into that. Things that I see often coming on the other side of that, and you see it more. We're lucky, me and you, Eric, is males are more resilient to stress. Now we're not unbreakable by any means. And I'm sure we both ran into cases to where you're like, hey, I need to pull back, things just don't feel right. But we are more resilient. There's more moving parts with females, and they push that threshold for too long, and you see it often. They'll even, a lot of times they'll cause themselves GI issues because it's just too much stress on the system. You'll see autoimmunity come from that. You'll see hypothyroidism. I mean, anytime you diet, your body's natural response to that, the thyroid downregulates. Going back to the metabolism, half of things that you talked about, as far as like what once was a caloric deficit, now it's not. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just that's your body's natural response. You've just been dieting for too long. Now your metabolic rate's lowered because your body, its job is just to survive. Your body's job is not to lose body fat. So if you eat these low calories for that long, your body starts to go into this survival mode to where it's going to downregulate that metabolic rate. And then as you start to reverse out of that, let's say you work down to 1,300 calories, then you bump it up to 16. Now all of a sudden you're in a surplus, where before 2,300 calories was your surplus. So it's your body's natural response to what you've been doing for a long period of time. I always say too, how you're responding right now, a lot of times isn't necessarily what you're doing currently. It's what you did 6 months before that. It's what you did a year prior to that, leading up to that deficit or leading up to that, surplus phase that you're going into.
Yeah, there's a latent impact from the actions that we take.
Yes.
There's so much of a latent impact. I've heard this in business. It's like, well, the business you have right now is based on the decisions and the operating system you had X, Y, and Z months or years ago, right? And very much the same is true with fitness. And I think one battle from a coaching perspective is sometimes people, they sign up for coaching, they're excited and they want to see this immediate result, when a lot of times to get the result that they ultimately want, it's like there's remedial work that has to be done to get back to a baseline point. Because you say something that really stands out to me, and it's, you can't heal in the same way that made you sick.
Yes. Yep.
Right.
And some of that too comes from the environmental factors. It's like you get a client that comes in and they have all these GI issues. Maybe they have PCOS. Again, I'm just throwing out examples. They have something from a functional perspective that needs fixed before their physique is going to improve. When they come in, we really dig into the history of when did this start? What triggered that? Because if this happened, we talked about stress-induced like GI issues and stress-induced, autoimmunity. When this got triggered, what was your environment? Were you in a toxic relationship? Were you surrounded by people who were just, very toxic on your life? Were you working a job that you hated and working for someone who just made your life miserable? You can take all the supplements that you want. You can be doing all the right things from a nutrition perspective. If you still have that same exact environment and you're still staying in that same mental state, kind of going back to, have we rewired that subconscious in the way that we respond to stress? Has our stress resiliency improved? If not, I don't care how many supplements you take, you're still in that same environment that caused those issues to begin with. You're going to have a really hard time coming out of it until you can do that deep inner work from a mental, stress perspective.
Do you feel like when you have somebody who says, I feel like I'm trying everything, I'm eating the right foods, I'm eating what should be a calorie deficit, I'm training hard, but it's not working for me. Do you think that is often the case? Let's say, taking aside the fact that they're actually doing these things as consistently as they should be, say 85, 90% of the time. Do you think that's often the case?
As far as their environment?
Yeah.
I think I'll say stress is probably the biggest silent killer in most physiques and the biggest silent killer in terms of illness as well. Now, for a prolonged period of time, like our bodies they are resilient. They can handle the acute stress, but when it turns into chronic stress for years upon years upon years, that's when it starts to become an issue. So 100%, absolutely.
Yeah. So when you're looking at stuff like this, do you often order labs? Are you looking at blood work? Like what type of metrics are you looking at when somebody's in this scenario?
Yeah, when we start, we don't necessarily require any testing. A lot of times we can, on our intake form too, we're going to ask detailed questions about their digestion, about their sleep, about their stress, what kind of like symptoms are they dealing with and what they're currently doing. So a lot of times we'll put something in place based off of that. And then that initial phase will almost act as a little bit of a litmus test for us in terms of like, do we need to do labs? Do we need to actually look deeper into the GI? Do we need to do maybe like a Dutch test to look at your adrenal pattern? Where do we need to go? Because a lot of times, like maybe what you have to actually address first might not pop up on serum lab work. And I will say like the GI issues, those have to get corrected before anything else. Because you could have GI issues, thyroid issues, hormone issues. You could have all these things coming in with all of the above. We can't try to work those separately because everything is going to work synergistically. So it's like we want to go at the biggest domino first. So what's going to be the biggest domino in that case? A lot of times it's the GI because again, like thyroid conversion happens in the gut. Hormones metabolize. The gut's going to affect neurotransmitters. So like mood, that's usually the biggest domino. So if there is a gut issue, we don't want to miss that. So again, as far as what testing, it's going to depend on how they start to respond as we kind of get going. But, and some people might not need any testing. Sometimes you'll put something in place and it's just like, wow, this just clicks for this individual. So that's kind of my thought process on that.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And so from a holistic perspective, let's say somebody comes back, maybe some gut dysfunction going on. What are some of the things that you would look to do nutritionally first before maybe digging even deeper into more testing? Like what type of food recommendations would you make? Any preparation styles that tend to lead to better gut health and function?
So pulling out common triggers that, are just kind of general: dairy, gluten, wheat, soy, corn. That's kind of that initial phase that I'll do. I like to play that subtraction game before I start adding anything. Like, let's see what we can take out of what you're currently doing and see what improvements, that we can make. Typically go like on the lower FODMAP, maybe even pull fiber down a little bit if they're eating like a crazy amount, causing some constipation, maybe some loose stool. So I'll always start there with the absolute basics. And then again, too, it's like kind of some of the other biomarkers that we talked about are going to feed into digestion. Like, are you sleeping bad? Because if you are, digestion's not going to be good. Is your stress really high? Because if it is, digestion's not going to be good. So kind of unraveling that entire picture before I even jump into like, hey, let's do this testing. Because it's one thing, a good coach, for one, it's expensive. It's going to be expensive to work with someone who is, has a good reputation. We don't want to have someone come in the door and be like, throw all these supplements on them, throw all these tests on them. Like, let's start really basic. Let's look at what you're currently doing. How can we improve that? Let's look at your current lifestyle. Is there room for improvement? Probably so. And then if we're still having those issues, then we may ask for some additional tests.
I love that approach because so many people are constantly busy and they have many things on their plate. And adding more things generally just adds more stress, more decision-making, and more variables, which conversely make it harder to actually implement any of them. And so that's one of the tough things. It's, hey, we actually need to pull you back and get a little bit of data first before we can make the best objective decision-making going forward, not just throw on a bunch of different supplements and some protocol without really knowing if it's going to work for you. I love that. I love that.
Something else too that we can kind of piggyback off of that, especially if they're a former athlete or, someone who just likes to work really hard in the gym. And we talked about like training is a stressor, stress is stress at the end of the day. And if someone has all of these issues, but they're training 5-6 days a week, doing 45 minutes of cardio every day, I'm starting there. They may not love that idea, but when they start, like we may pull training down to 2 or 3 times a week with a half body split, so a lot less volume. We may take their Stairmaster cardio into like, hey, just go on a leisure walk outside. Where can I, as a coach, pull back on your stress? What can I manage? I can't manage your family life. I can't do any of that. But what I can manage is the training component. Like, how can I pull out as much stress as I possibly can? And then try to see where these symptoms start to trend from there.
I love that. I love that approach. And I think that's a natural segue into some of the training points. And I think this is something you and I were discussing a little bit over the last, say, week and a half. And something I was discussing with somebody else lately. There's obviously been more of a trend towards low volume training. And I think part of that is people are getting better at actually training with enough intensity. Yes. And that's a good thing, right? Because like when I'm doing a set, say if I have 2 work sets in a workout, I might have 3 or 4 ramp up sets. So to actually get to a load that's going to elicit the training response we're looking for. It's a really difficult concept, I think, for a lot of people to understand. But like, let's say we have somebody who's got good baseline health, and what they're focused on doing is they just want to build lean muscle. They want to look as great naked as they can while optimizing their health and performance. Say 30, 35-year-old man, like where would you begin on the training component?
As far as, you mean volume?
Training volume, frequency. We can look at the variables one by one. Let's imagine we've got a case study for somebody who's similar to me.
It kind of going back to what you said, how advanced are they? Can they send me videos? If they send me training videos and they've been training for a long period of time, they're getting the absolute most out of every single rep. They're treating it like, like it's my last rep. Could probably get away with starting pretty low volume, kind of like you said. Like, I like that low volume approach because more isn't always better. Like, better is better. So if you're training really well, we can probably get away with just a couple working sets per exercise. And then on the back end of that, like, recovery is so much more efficient. Like, we're not growing muscle tissue when we're in the gym training. We're growing muscle tissue from what we can recover from. So if I have all this, we could call it junk volume. It's kind of that word that everyone throws around. We're doing 5-6 sets of every movement, but we're not even really getting to that like mechanical failure area. Are we really even eliciting much growth, or are we just kind of beating ourselves up and not allowing for as much recovery? So when I look at volume, I'm looking at how advanced that person is for sure. And then if someone comes in and they're not very advanced, what I'll typically do is start them out more so of like a half body split environment, because now they're training those muscle groups a lot more frequently. They're getting more practice. Practice makes perfect, right? So they're practicing more often. And then once we have those exercises down to a T, maybe we move to a 3rd body split or a 4th body split, or, maybe they have a muscle group that wants to come up. We can prioritize that. And that's when I'll start titrating the volume a little bit lower.
That makes sense. And so like it's always tough because as coaches, we're going to be like, well, it depends based on this individual. Would you say for the vast majority of people, they tend to get better results if they're training a muscle multiple times throughout the week versus kind of the classic body part split? Like, hey, we're just hitting chest on Monday, and we might touch chest a little bit on like a shoulder day on Thursday or Friday, but generally speaking, it's going to be more of a shoulder focus. Do you tend to find like a more optimal frequency for training particular muscle groups?
I have found that people will tend to respond a little bit more efficient with a little bit more frequency, to where, if we're doing just a chest day, imagine how high that volume is going to be on that day. So we're just training chest. So let's say like you get a program from someone and it's just like chest only. You're probably going to do like 5-6 different chest movements because that's all you're training. And then volume starts to add up. And again, it's like, are we going to be able to recover from that? So I'm a big fan of a little bit more frequency with lower end volume if we can get away with it. But then again, if I had to give one answer, that would be it. But it is kind of like it depends, because the longer you work with people too, you may find this one person just responds to a little bit more volume. So maybe you do kind of run that bro split in a sense. But generally speaking, I have found a little bit more frequency usually works better.
Yeah, I found something similar. Again, there's the individual component, but like, what I find is, hey, if we can break up that volume and space it out over 2 or even 3 training sessions throughout the week, first, we're probably going to be training some similar movement patterns pretty consistently. So from like a neurological programming component, we're going to get a little bit better there. We're going to improve our muscle fiber recruitment. If we're going heavy, maybe better fast twitch, multi-unit, stuff like that. Like, that's going to be excellent. And the total volume for the week might actually hit, whatever threshold we're looking for. But because it's broken up and we have some recovery between it, and considering stress and all these other factors that are going on, notice better strength gains, which often precedes the ability to actually push the intensity high enough, within those training sets to get better growth. And so,
yep, I'm right there with you. I agree.
Yeah, it's so interesting because again, we see these different trends and philosophical changes in the fitness industry just kind of runs through. But I think now as we continue to see more emphasis on recovery and people are coming a lot more knowledge on, some of the tools we talked about before, like, HRV, for example, how is this actually impacting me as a full organism, not just how sore am I the next day? People are becoming so much more intelligent with this overall training approach. Weight training perspective, training muscle groups multiple times per week. It's going to vary per individual, but ideally sometimes that frequency be a little bit higher, and that's going to be an excellent foundation. What about the cardiovascular component? Like, where do you start? Are you somebody that's like, hey, let's just focus on getting 10,000 steps a day and we go from there? Or is it like, I need everyone to do zone 2 cardio at least 2 or 3 days a week? Like, what does that look like?
So as far as the zone 2 cardio, I think it's important for everyone to bring in at least, a couple times throughout the year. And the thing about that, as far as aerobic capacity, once you have it, you're going to have it for a good amount of time. So it's like, even if we run this, and that's one of those things too, if you're allocating more volume in a sense to zone 2 cardio, the aerobic system, you probably need to pull back a little bit on the training component. So, we can't just have training through the roof and do all this cardio at the same time, going back to the stress conversation. We only have so much to recover from. So if I'm going to run that, kind of phase of, hey, this is what we're doing. We're focused on the conditioning component. Maybe we have a health concern. We need to improve our aerobic system as a whole. I'm probably going to pull back on the training a little bit, kind of go to like what we were talking about, maybe a full body split a few times a week, maybe a half body split a few times a week. But you can run that for 6, 8, 10 weeks as long as you're doing it correctly and, putting the effort in, getting the most out of it. And then you can back off for a good amount of time because, again, your aerobic capacity is better. You're going to maintain that for a good duration of time before you got to bring it back. Like, people just, they don't prioritize that, especially, sometimes in our environment, like, people just want to lift weights all the time, even as a former competitor. And I'm guilty as hell of it too. They want to just lift and they don't want to take care of the aerobic stuff. And I think that's really important for health.
Yeah, definitely. It's been interesting as well because, we see energy system experts like Joel Jamieson do a great job of breaking down energy systems. My good friend Jason Brown does a great job talking about the importance of cardio in kind of his conjugate style training as well. I think it's something where, kind of as you mentioned, it takes me back to like the sport performance world where we'd have different phases, right? We'd have, different cycles throughout the year. Like, hey, this phase is power, this one's strength, this one's muscle, this one's going to be, more in season, whatever it is. And when you cycle your training while adapting some of these variables, like the physiological quality that you're training can carry over and improve that next one. And cardio is one of those big examples. Even, speaking personally, like with my programming right now, like we've ramped up my cardio, some of these components directly looking at it, my resting heart rate's like 41, right? And like, and I'm not a guy who does a lot of cardio, but like I've built like it up to certain points pretty well. Yep. And even when my cardio is like not really high, even if we're just doing walking, it might go up to like 50, which is still, again, really good. I'm very fortunate for that. But it just kind of highlights like when you keep these different parameters in and ratchet them up, like you can see a pretty definitive change in something like the overall,
pretty short time period too.
Yeah. And that's one of the beautiful things.
Yeah, and that's one of those things too. If you have someone who's very data driven, that's a really good environment where you'll see progress visually because you can track that heart rate. What intensity am I having to use to get that heart rate up to that 140, 150, whatever we're shooting for? You should eventually have to raise that intensity to reach that same heart rate. And you will. Again, if you're doing it right, you'll see that progress pretty dang fast.
Yeah. And let's talk about even the nutrient partitioning component of it, right? Because we get a lot of people who will primarily focus on training, but or on lifting weights. And let's say you have somebody who's lifting weights, but they don't really emphasize cardio. And they're trying to, again, have kind of this gradual recomposition of building lean muscle, losing body fat. What importance will that cardiovascular training play and how effective their nutrition is? Not even from a calories in, calories out perspective, but from just overall efficiency.
I mean, as far as like, you'll have some people who just kind of sit all day. Maybe that's their job. They sit at a computer all day. You will find if they're eating quite a bit of food, they're in this surplus, they're going to have a much harder time stabilizing those blood sugars versus someone who, and this is kind of even outside of like pushing zone 2 cardio and like really pressing the aerobic system, but you're going to find someone who even gets out and goes on a 10-15 minute walk after they eat, their sugar levels are going to stabilize so much more efficiently. So I think there's a lot to be said about just getting up up and just movement as a whole is going to help stabilize those sugars.
Yeah, I think all that stuff is so important. Again, calories in, calories out, like that stuff definitely matters from it.
Oh,
but
yeah.
there are so many other metrics, so many things that happen like at a cellular level through our training that I think are more important than simply looking at exercise through the lens of how many calories is this burning directly? For example, like a pound of muscle tissue, it increases caloric expenditure by 12 calories a day, whatever it is. I don't even know how they fucking measure that. Anyway, that's another story altogether. But like what's hard to quantify, and I get a lot of clients who really want to know the why and like understand like, well, the research says this, like what does this actually mean in a practical sense, because they need to logically put it together. Like what are some of the other benefits directly of resistance training? Like what does it do even at like a cellular level? What are different things that it could do for long-term health and the way that your body takes the foods that you're using, breaking it down and makes you a healthier, more jacked human being?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think building muscle tissue probably the best thing that you can do for your metabolism as a whole, because like you were saying, you're going to have more energy expenditure the more muscle tissue that you have. If you're someone who's kind of like in that skinny fat environment, you're going to have a really hard time partitioning nutrients, and your metabolic rate's probably going to be really low. I think too, like it has a big impact on just your overall mood, throughout the day. Neurotransmitters, your hormones, it plays such a big role in that, your sex drive, like, your quality of life as a whole. Man, I think there's so many benefits there.
Yeah, and we can go down rabbit holes with that too. It's like, hey, if we're talking about neurotransmitters, we can look at, okay, if we have a healthy gut environment, that's going to be good, supporting more neurotransmitters. Exercise is going to support that as well. There's a relationship between dopamine and testosterone levels, a relationship between testosterone levels and our ability to lose body fat, build lean muscle. So there's so many complex intricacies throughout the body, which makes it important to be able to sometimes pull away from like just what the data says and focus on the process itself, understanding that all kinds of these environments are going to be improved at the same time that ultimately leads you towards a goal that you're looking for.
Another thing too that I wanted to mention about the aerobic system. So even if you have that athlete who is mainly wanting to resistance train, and they may be a little bit skeptical or give you a little bit of pushback and say, hey, I really don't know how I feel about going through this aerobic phase and pulling back on some of the train. Let's take just a brutal set of like Bulgarian split squats, for example. I mean, you know how you feel after that. You're out of breath, you're gassed, you just need to sit down, and usually that set stops because you're out of breath. It's usually not your glutes or your quads. It's usually because you can't breathe. So taking that aerobic phase and then coming back to a hypertrophy phase, imagine how much more you're going to be able to get out of that Bulgarian split squat if you can breathe more efficiently, if your aerobic system's a lot healthier. So there's a lot of kind of drawback to, yes, it kind of sucks, I'm pulling out of hypertrophy for this, but on the flip side, going back into it, I'm probably going to recover a lot more efficiently, and I'm probably going to be able to get more out of that next training phase.
Yeah, it builds that work capacity. It lets you push everything that much harder. Yep. I love that. Okay, so we've talked about some baseline health components, digestive health, training. From a nutrition perspective, you've been a competitor yourself. You've worked with many as well. What do you find to be an ideal, even meal frequency? Because that's something that's a very hotly debated topic. We've seen trends with intermittent fasting. We've seen, everything from one meal a day to, if we want to look back, 6, 7, 8 meals a day. Like, where do you stand?
I'm more of like that 4. Like 4 meals a day is pretty good for me. That's typically what I'll use. You'll have someone who just has a really long day though, and they may feel a little bit like they're just awake for a long period of time. They may feel better off 5, but I'm right around that 4 mark. We're eating somewhere between like every 3 to 5 hours or so is usually kind of a sweet spot for most people.
Yeah. And with that, are you looking at consistent protein intake with each meal? Is it front loaded, back loaded? I mean, I've seen research where it's like, hey, your body actually tends to do better in terms of protein absorption and utilization when the amounts are fairly similar throughout the day.
Yep, that's exactly what I do. I'll take whatever I'm going to give them total protein wise and just evenly spread that throughout the day. Now, we may, like talking about other macronutrients, maybe we prioritize carbohydrates a little bit more heavy around their workout, but protein is usually just pretty balanced across the board.
Yeah. And so what are some of the benefits of that, even from a hunger and regulation component?
I think just a satiety component. I mean, protein it's going to keep you full for longer, especially if you're in a deficit. So, just having that balance throughout the day, I think is really important. And two, like, again, because it is such a high satiety, someone's cramming a bunch of protein in one meal, they're probably going to be extremely full. From a digestion perspective, we know too, stomach acid plays such a big role in digesting protein. So if someone's a little bit lower stomach acid, stress washes out stomach acid. So you take someone who's really stressed out, and most people are these days, I'm eating a ton of protein in one meal. how well am I really going to break that down? Protein's probably the hardest macro to break down in general.
Yeah, definitely. And thermic effect is, or I think we burn 30% of the calories that we actually consume via protein simply by breaking down that chunk of steak into usable amino acids. Like that's incredible, and ties back to the early discussion on gut health. Now, when you're looking at, like, say, peri-workout nutrition, what do you typically recommend? Do you have somebody having a meal right before? Are they drinking anything in particular during? Anything immediately after?
Yeah, I usually tell people at least wait, 90 minutes is kind of general. Even if you need to wait a little bit longer, make sure there's not food sitting in your stomach when you're training. So, 90 minutes is kind of a general approach. I'll add in some intra workout carbs for some people if I think they need it from a performance perspective. Cyclic dextrin is good. I'll even have some people do Gatorade. I'll even have some people do just honey, mix some honey in their water, just something that's going to digest really fast and you can utilize for energy right away.
Yeah. And so what are the benefits of directly having some fuel in your system? Because, you see a lot of low carb stuff, you see a lot of fasting. And again, some of these things can have, I think, a short-term efficacy to, fix some issues. But I see a lot of people run into issues. They fall in love with, say they did 16-8 intermittent fasting, lost a bunch of weight, and they want to stick with it forever. But what happens to, like, the quality of the training, and even beyond the quality of the training itself? Like, what happens within the body when we're maybe training, pushing the envelope in a high stress environment without a proper feeding beforehand?
Yeah, as far as the intra workout, that's an environment too. If someone's in a surplus, I like using that more because it may be just an easy way to get more carbohydrates in throughout the day, especially if they're eating a lot of food. In a deficit, you may have someone who'd be like, I would rather eat food than drink a freaking pre-workout carb drink. And, I don't blame them. From a performance perspective, it's just additional fuel. It's additional gas to the fire during that training session that you're going to be able to utilize, again, right away. So those are kind of the benefits that I lean to and when I probably would use it versus when I would not. Again, a deficit, I usually don't lean towards that intra drink just because someone's probably hungry throughout the day and would just rather eat food.
I can totally relate to that.
I'm the same way, man. If I'm in a deficit and I'm starving, I don't care about an intra workout drink.
I don't even care about protein shakes. I'm like, give me something else. No. Okay, so building on that aspect, like, do people need to, you think, really jump in and have that protein shake or protein source directly after the workout? Do you think it's better to wait a little bit, specifically if they've had intra-workout carbs? Because obviously it's a stressful environment when we're training hard. Is the body really in an ideal state to jump directly from that hard training session into optimizing digestion and breaking down protein, which is notoriously hard for us to break down?
Yep. I always just recommend just wait until your heart rate's calmed down. Wait until you're in this calm parasympathetic state. If you're still in this high wired sympathetic dominant state, stressed out state from the training session, digestion's going to be really hindered. You're probably not going to break down that food, very efficiently or shuttle those nutrients where they need to go. The glucose is going to be high if cortisol's high. So it's like, if we're coming into that post-workout meal and glucose is still really high from that training session, why do I want to shovel a bunch of carbs into my system right now, or a bunch of food into my system? So I don't necessarily have like an exact time frame with that. I always just tell people, like, hey, don't be trying to eat on your way home from the gym because of your anabolic window. Wait till you get home, wait till you're sitting down, calm down, and you're going to be fine. Wait till, you can kind of gauge it too. Is my heart rate still up? How am I feeling in that regard?
So you're saying when I finish a leg press, I don't have to sprint over to the water, elbow Sally out of the way and fill up that protein shake?
Man, you see some crazy stuff. I'll see people eating like Pop-Tarts mid-set. It's crazy out there.
It is wild. It's probably a good supplement angle though. Like, hey, anabolic Pop-Tarts, you can eat these while you're supine on the leg press.
Maybe.
So the last frontier that we haven't really covered yet is sleep. And I feel like sleep is the thing that ties in all of these components together. And it's something that the vast majority of people tend to put on the back burner, even if they hear Matthew Walker on Joe Rogan and then pick up a book or whatever's going on in terms of the importance of sleep. What does this tie together? Like, from a hormonal perspective, where do you put sleep? Obviously, all these things are connected, but like, if you had a hierarchy of like sleep, nutrition, training, where would that be for you?
Right at the very top. More important than nutrition even. Probably, it's right up there with stress, but of course they tie in together. If we don't have, and that's one of the, I don't want to label that like 1, 2, 3, 4. But that's one of the things that I'm working on with individuals than your peri-workout nutrition. All those advanced things. If we don't have that foundation, we don't have anything. So that's I mean, that's right up there at the very, very tip top.
Yeah. And so like what type of things do you focus on first with sleep? You've got somebody say, again, 30, maybe they got young kids. They have, a lot going on in terms of professional stress. Maybe they just got a promotion, so they have a lot more stuff on their plate directly. How do you help them prioritize quality sleep when potentially getting 8-9 hours isn't always going to be in the books?
Yep. So our bodies are not wired to, and this is something I have to kind of check myself on at times too. Our bodies are not wired. And I'm just going to use a personal example, to be sitting here on my laptop until midnight and then walk directly in my room and go to sleep. It's not going to work. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just, you're not setting, your sleep hygiene sucks. A lot that I talk with them clients, it's like, how can we set ourselves up to get that quality of sleep? And I want you to take that just as important as your training session the next day. Like, how, you're all worried about how can I make my performance this good? Well, how can we set you up to sleep? And, blue light blocking glasses, if you work from a computer, if you're watching TV, after the sun goes down, those are really efficient. They're going to block 90, order the orange ones. They're not, they're not sexy by any means, but the clear ones aren't going to do very well. That blue light that's coming in is going to deplete our ability to make natural melatonin. So melatonin's low. We're probably not going to sleep very well. So those glasses really help me personally. Staying away from light screens and all that. That's kind of one of those cases, like if you have to watch a screen for work or whatever it is, get those glasses. A cold room, make sure your room's really cold. Do something too, maybe an Epsom salt bath, or, read 10 pages out of a book. Like, set yourself up in an environment to get quality sleep. And it may take an hour, maybe the last 2 hours of your day. But I think in this fast-paced environment that we're in nowadays, people they think that we're just going to shut down and go directly to sleep after a long, stressful day. And that's not going to be the case.
Yeah. This actually makes me think of, my dad growing up. My dad's an engineer, and most jobs that he had, we always seem to live at least like 30 minutes to an hour away. And I was talking with him later on, once I'm out of the house. I'm like, well, why do you always work so far away from the house? And he's like, part of it was being able to have a time to decompress after and be able to transition from a highly analytical job and be able to then go home and be a dad, be able to focus on these different things.
That's
and now, yeah, but like even now as a father, I can relate to that a lot, where it's like, I need a little bit of a buffer time from being executive function, coaching, all of this stuff all day, for 12 plus hours, to decompress. How can I be a good dad? How can I be a good husband? How can I do some of these? Right. And then even from that point, it can be, I've got a toddler. So like, shit, we just had a meltdown. How do we go from meltdown to decompress again to actually being able to go to sleep and not have sky high stress and cortisol and all these components? And so optimizing sleep, I just find to be so important, where people look, what supplements can I take? What testosterone booster can I have? All these different components. And ultimately, people will blast all kinds of money on all these other, supplements and kind of gimmicks, whatever it is, before they take care of the foundational thing that's actually proven to optimize insulin sensitivity, reduce cortisol, optimize testosterone levels, help you get stronger, improve reaction timing across the board. And so that's the foundational thing above all.
It's one of those things too that people probably just don't want to hear. I think, they probably know that's an issue, but they're looking for that next shiny thing that's just going to override that sleep. And unfortunately, you're not going to out supplement. You're not going to out diet chronic stress, low levels of sleep for a long period of time. There's just simply no way around it. Something else that could help too is kind of getting away from, the before bed stuff is really important. But on the flip side of that, like, what are we doing first thing in the morning to actually set that circadian rhythm? So I'll have a lot of people go outside, get their feet in the grass, like do some grounding, or just simply go on a walk, get some sun in your face to set that circadian rhythm. That will actually on the backside help with sleep too.
Yeah. Hey, small hinges, swing big doors. One final thing on sleep, and you can speak to this better than most. You've been traveling to Saudi quite a bit, Saudi Arabia. How do you handle jet lag? How do you handle your training, when you're dealing with that significant time change, and you're making that trip quite frequently as well, aren't you?
Yeah. It's every other month. I'm there for 1 month. I'm home for 1 month. Man, it's still tricky. I've got it down pretty good at this point. What I typically do is I try to stay on United States time when I'm over there. The time difference is about 9 hours. So I'm 9 hours ahead in Saudi, but I'll typically, go to bed around 4 a.m. or so Saudi time. So that's about 7 to 8 p.m. in the US. And I try to stay on that time for all my clients are on that schedule. So it just makes life a little bit easier for everybody. But training wise, It's a really good question because my training absolutely gets pulled down when I'm over there. My recovery is not as good. I'm for one, yes, I'm sleeping in a new bed, but I'm also on the other side of the world. My recovery is just not good. So I'll go from training, 5 times a week to I'll kind of go back to that sometimes half body split a few times a week just to because we have to have realistic expectations. I'm probably not going to make a lot of progress when I'm in Saudi. I kind of set myself up to progress the months that I'm back home. So when I'm in Saudi, I just want to maintain as much tissue as I want. I don't want to move backwards, but I'm more so prioritizing that sleep component, prioritizing that stress management component. That way, when I do come back home, I'm not starting from a negative place from where I was.
Yeah, it's a powerful insight. Kind of go with the flow a little bit and like pull back when it's needed and then ramp things up when things are a little bit more solidified instead of trying to hold constant across the board, which might have some detriments. Blake, this was incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for being here. Where can we find out more about you?
Yeah, my Instagram is @BlakeWest22.
Awesome. And so if we got any questions, we should fire over to you. If we have any coaching inquiries, that's the spot.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Just shoot me a DM and I'd be glad to have a conversation with you guys.
Awesome. Thank you, brother.
All right, man. Thank you.
Hey, it's Eric here again. Now, there are 3 ways that I can help you look great naked. Number 1, if you want to grab a free copy of the Look Great Naked protocol to help you lose body fat without counting calories, then go to bachperformance.com/free training. Number 2, if you're a busy guy looking to build muscle, then I recommend checking out our Minimalist Muscle Blitz, which has helped over 1,000 men build muscle without living in the gym. Just go to minimalistmuscleblitz.com. The link will also be available in the show notes. Or number 3 and last, if you want to work with me directly and get the best results possible, apply at bachperformance.com/coaching to look great naked without living in the gym. Until next time, my friend.